Hello and welcome to Setting the Stage, Episode 44, Derry and Golarion. In order for the podcast to continue, I really need more guests to volunteer to be on the show. So if you're interested, or if you know someone who is interested, please go to gocorral.com/STS to learn more about how to apply to be on the show. That's GOCORRAL.com/STS. All right. Today I'm here talking with Derry, who won a crit award for his, your whole group's podcast, not just you. So congratulations. Hi, Derry.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was actually pretty cool that I got to be the one to break the news to you.
You did. I was literally just finishing up recording a session, and we'd signed out for the night. And I think as soon as I signed out, I got a notification, and it was from you, Isaac. And I was like, "What's this?" And you were like, "Oh my God, congrats!" And I was like, "For what? What did I do?"
Oh yeah, and I saw you posted your little acceptance speech half an hour after you talked to me or something.
Yeah, because they had DM'd about hey, everyone should record an acceptance speech, right? But I was having a really, really busy month, and I saw the other people we were up against in the Legacy podcast group, and I was like, these guys are really good. I think our chances of winning are probably slim because some of these shows are huge. They got massive budgets. So Dice Will Roll we'll leave it to it. What are the odds of it winning? And then,
well, yeah, that's really cool. Did you get a sticker or a plaque or something?
We got a pat on the back, and we got great advertising. I think we got a huge burst of downloads from people coming to check it out, and I think that in itself is worth 1 million stickers. So I'm absolutely delighted.
All right, awesome. Well, yeah. So we got the unusual format though that we'll cut through alongside the congratulations. So yeah, wanted to hear who you are outside of RPGs and podcasting and all that stuff.
My name is Derry. I am an animator. I've been working in animation now for going on 2.5 years, nearly 3 years, I think. Mostly working on kids shows for small enough productions, but it's a living I'm very happy with. The last show we were working on, I think, ended about a month ago, and it was about mermaids in Ireland based on an old myth. And I guess the best way of describing it is Celtic anime. That's the kind of the subtitle we'd give everyone who was asking about the show is yeah, it's a Celtic anime, Well,
kind of like the new Lord of the Rings movie that's coming out.
Very much so, yeah. Except not made in Japan. That is the one key difference. But
yes.
The idea of combining those two aesthetics together, it was great fun, and I don't know where it's coming out, but it's coming out very soon, and we're all very excited about that. Beyond that, beyond that, it's mostly TTRPG. As soon as I'm done animating, I work on the Team Plus book series. It's a series of supplements for Pathfinder 2nd edition, and of course, Dice Will Roll itself.
What are the supplements you were talking about? So
Team Plus, this is actually related to Dice Will Roll. One day when we were figuring out our third campaign, which was Fists of the Ruby Phoenix, which is an anime fighting tournament, my partner really, really likes magical girls. And I talked to him. We figured out what kind of character he wanted to make. And he decided he wanted to make a witch, but he specifically wanted to make a sea witch.
Okay.
At the time, there were no sea witches in Pathfinder. And I was like, I'll just make one. It's fine. And I made the worst homebrew possible. It was phenomenally broken. It was way too strong. And I posted it in a Discord server I was in. And a guy commented and it was like, I like the idea. The mechanics are bad, but I really like the narrative. Could I help you write some more? And I was like, sure. You know what? Why don't we write a few? And then we can sell on Pathfinder Infinite, which is DM's Guild for Pathfinder. And you know what? Then it will legitimize me using homebrew in the podcast. That was 3 years ago now, and I think we've sold a couple of thousand copies of our books.
Wow.
So
That's really cool.
it worked out pretty decently, I think. People really
Yeah.
like it. I really like it. So happy days.
That's really cool. And then this was Dave, right?
That's right. Yeah, it was Dave with Sanku, the Witch Prince of the Sea.
Yeah. I was curious if I mean, I haven't listened to the Ruby Phoenix one. Was there some like good rivalry with the villainous witch in that one?
Yes, actually, that was great. One of the bad guys in Fist Ruby Phoenix, Sutak Noir, she is
A hair witch.
yeah, she's got the hair thing, and it's really freaky. Meanwhile, because Dave specifically wanted Sanku to be as good a person as possible, because so many witches that you will see will be like, I cook babies. And he was like,
Yeah.
I want to make one who's just sparkles and sunshine and, a big smile on his face at all times. So being able to introduce this rival witch she has hair that will like moves on her own. She has a moth familiar that looks like it will be kind of watch you walking around the room. She's vindictive. She knocked people out of the competition, not because she needed to win more points, but just because she felt like it. She was awful, and I loved playing her, and she was a great rival to that character.
Yeah. That team is meant to be like a dark mirror for the party, kind of. So that's really
Yeah,
cool.
no, it worked out perfectly. Like, it was clear that Paizo had intended them to be kind of like literally the most like as all the tropes you will find in a fighting arc, they were the absolute opposites and like the perfect foils. And I hadn't told my party about any of these characters, but one by one, they each fell into a rival role with a different character in the party, and it was perfect.
And I mean, I'm sort of getting off track here, but how did you handle like the 3v4? Because a lot of the teams are, and you have 3 players in your party, right?
That's right. Yes.
And a lot of the teams are 4 people because adventures are balanced around 4. Did you just like eliminate one? How did you make that work?
So generally, we kept it as is. That is kind of the one awkward stumbling point is because we run a lot of like pre-made adventure paths, and a lot of the time, Paizo will include things that are meant to be kind of mirrors to your party. Like in Abomination Vaults, which is the current campaign we're running, the town that you guys are in is Otari, and it was founded by a group of adventurers, and there's 4 of them. And 3 of them are perfect mirrors, but there's always kind of like one left over. And with that one left over, thematically, I try to do something different with. With the one left over in Abomination Vaults, I kind of had him represent the spirit of adventure itself for reasons that make a lot more sense when you actually listen to the show. I won't spoil anything big, But in Ruby Phoenix, what I did there was I gave Sanku's familiar a rival. Sanku's familiar was a sea dragon who was like a very wise, scholarly man who loved teaching others. And I made the last member of the Lightkeepers, their name is the villain team, a grouchy hobgoblin necromancer who's not willing to tell anyone their knowledge, very spiteful, does not get well with even their own team. It worked out fairly well. So okay. I think it's very case by case, but when it works out, it works out.
I'm kind of prepping for running that myself now, and I'm curious what your party thought about the sort of rug pull in the second adventure.
Oh, towards the end?
Yeah.
That was, I think, one of our favorite sessions ever.
Oh, okay. Cool.
They were delighted, right? Like, yes, oh no, everything's suddenly a bad thing has happened. And I'm being very, very vague.
I mean, the adventure kind of clues you in, not to what happens, but to like, you're ready for the conclusion, but this is the second of 3 in this adventure path. Something has to happen, right?
The crazy thing is my party was like, hey, why is there a 3rd book? And then I was like, don't worry about it.
So the campaign that I wanted to talk about, Abomination Vaults, the one you're doing right now, is meant to be within the broader like release schedule for Pathfinder, the one that feeds into Ruby Phoenix.
To an extent, yeah, I think so. It's tricky because the two, like, they do say you can, but personally, I would never recommend one into the other myself.
Mhm.
Like, technically you can. It is, Abomination Vaults is an adventure where you are going from first level to 10th level. And by the end of it, you are a famous party. People around the country know you. You've done well. You know, you've done a lot of good in the world. And then Ruby Phoenix, it's 11 to 20. You're supposed to be like, you're coming from already being an established party who are, you know, ready to take part in a tournament for super powerful fighters. But I think personally, I would never recommend someone, like, if it works for you, then all power for it, right? But to me, I would generally think that if you're taking a party that was like in a dungeon crawl, and then suddenly they are in what is essentially a anime fighting tournament arc, it's quite a tonal shift between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, for sure.
and you'll have like your characters would have all these skills and abilities meant for dealing with abominations and undead and all these terrible things you'd find deep underground. But throughout the entire campaign in Ruby Phoenix, I think the only time you go underground, aside from maybe like while you're exploring Danger Island, the only time you go underground is to a gambling den in an optional mission in book 2.
Yeah,
So
yeah. There are not
they are
many
very
things that are
different.
inside for that
Mm.
adventure. Most of the combats are outside or in a sort of featureless arena sometimes.
Yes. I think if you were going to run any adventure after Abomination Vaults, and I don't think we're going to do this for Dice to Roll, but what if I were to suggest, hey, if you want to take your characters from Abomination Vaults into another adventure, I think it's got to be Curtain Call, which was just released. I think book 3 is releasing this month. And I won't spoil anything for it because I get books in advance because I'm doing stuff for Pathfinder Infinite. And I think the 3rd book isn't out yet. So I'm keeping more or less hush.
Well, it will be by the time this episode releases.
Yeah. But Curtain Call, what I will say, has rules in the thing for the GM to be like, here's how you would take characters from Abomination Vaults or from Outlaws of Alkenstar, or any of the other 1st to 10th level adventure paths, which I think is great. I think that Curtain Call is very much so written to be a sequel to an existing campaign. Ruby
cool.
Phoenix, I think you kind of want to go in with a brand new party. Unless you were doing something in Tiansha or like something that would mesh with the kind of wacky vibes of a fighting arc. Originally, we were going to play our characters as all being a rock band from the Darklands, but we ended up going with more traditional anime tropes just because when are we going to get another chance? The answer was a few months later when the next Tiansha Adventure Pack came out, but that was our thinking at the time. This is our one shot to play Tian characters properly.
Yeah. My plan was to do Seasons of Ghost feeding into Ruby Phoenix. It's not quite on the right level, but I felt like it's close enough.
You can kind of backtrack, and I think those two, there is something that, like, I think there is a little bit of chemistry between them. You can definitely do it by virtue of being from Tiansha already. Your characters are more likely to be loaded up with a lot of the storytelling tropes that will lend itself to Ruby Phoenix. So I think it works pretty nicely.
Okay, cool. We're getting off my usual track there. Good talk about though. How did you first start getting into RPGs?
This is embarrassing. When I was a kid, there was a spin-off of Scooby-Doo called Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue. It is notoriously a very bad show. It has none of the mystery gang. It doesn't have mysteries at all.
Is this the one where like Scooby gets superpowers?
Yeah, he gets superpowers every episode from chemically enhanced Scooby snack. It's a bad show, is the point, right? I don't remember very much from it. I remembered enjoying it, but I think the consensus is that it was a very strange departure from the formula of Scooby-Doo.
Mhm.
That being said, there was one episode where there were these two nerd villains who were working for the big villain, and they were their game of like their thing of the week. The thing they were really into was a board game called Gardens and Gnomes, and they kept playing it throughout the episode. And as a kid, I was like, "Whoa, that looks fun!" Even though the episode was very obviously making fun of them. So I grabbed some of my friends and I made my own TTRPG.
Oh, wow.
And it was bad. The balance probably wasn't great. I mean, it's basically rolling. I think we had D6s because D20s were a foreign concept to us. It was very rudimentary. And the two people I was playing with were clearly not as invested in playing it so much as they were in dicking around.
Uh-huh.
Like one of the characters was Keanu Reeves, and I did not know who Keanu Reeves was at the time.
Oh.
And I think they stole an old lady's apples and just tormented the town for the entire session instead of doing any adventuring.
Typical first campaign kind of stuff.
Yes, of course. But that stuck with me. And one day, a friend of mine on Twitter was like, "Hey, I'm going to run Iron Gods. Does anyone want to join?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I'll join." And I'll invite my friend, Dave, who I've not spoken to much yet, and say, "Hey, do you want to play this?" We played, and that campaign was kind of a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I was going to say your first campaign was Iron Gods, really?
Yeah, it was. I didn't know how long a campaign was. It was going to be recorded, but the GM's recording software failed, and I'm forever thankful of that. She was. I mean, I wrote about this on RPG Horror Stories.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was that bad. I would feel free to, like, if you're at home listening to this, if you look up RPG Horror Stories and just Derry Zumi, that's my username, you'll find it. And I mean, content warning for basically every terrible thing under the sun. It was bad. But at one point, I kind of realized I don't like how she's running this. I want to run something myself. So I pirated my first campaign from the Trove, rest in peace.
Mm-hmm.
And I have now given Paizo thousands of dollars, so I think I made up for it. But I pirated my first campaign because I didn't know anything about Pathfinder. I didn't know the lore of the setting at all, but I picked up Carrion Crown. And I asked Dave, "Hey, do you have any friends that would be interested in playing?" And he got two friends from high school that we had just graduated. He hadn't spoken to these friends properly for a while. We invited them to the game, and we absolutely fell in love with Carrion Crown. That campaign is 6 books long. It's 14 levels. We finished it in 5 months.
Oh, wow.
We powered through it. And we powered through Hell's Rebels, and we powered through Tyrant's Grasp until it got too sad.
This feels like you must have been playing like 3 times a week or something. Jeez.
No, we were playing once a week, but for far too long.
Like 12 hours?
I mean, to put it this way, the finale of Carrion Crown was recorded. I was living in digs at the time, so like an apartment where the landlord lives with you as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it in the kitchen of the digs at 4 a.m. I remember tearfully narrating the final blow against the big boss of Carrion Crown because I didn't want to be upstairs in my room because it would wake up my landlord. And we had started much earlier than 4 a.m., I'll say that much. That's how we got started. Eventually, when Pathfinder 2nd Edition was announced, we were like, let's listen to some playtest podcast stuff. And there were a few. I think the Glass Cannon podcast was the biggest one.
Yep.
But we also kind of realized, wow, everyone here is a 30 to 40-year-old guy with like a family and a mortgage and stuff. And that's fine. Good. That is a majority of the people in the country, right? But we realized very quickly there were not many podcasts in Pathfinder Second Edition, which, at the time was still in the playtest, by people who were like, I don't want to be strange about it, but like, queer young people of like different cultural backgrounds. And we were like, the humor in a lot of these is not really what we would find funny. Like, it's funny, but it's not like it's not our cup of tea. It's good, but it's not great. And we decide, let's be the change we want to be in the world. We've got a mic. We've got Doomsday Dawn. We'll record. And we recorded. And the episodes are still out there for the first, I think, book of Doomsday Dawn. And it was an absolute nightmare. It was so badly recorded. The voice levels, you'd have me super loud, and then it would cut to Luna speaking so quietly. You had to really lean in, and then it would cut to me laughing so loud it would burst your ears.
Yep.
We ended up deleting those episodes because we were not proud of them, but we had gotten fan art from someone who was delighted to see Dave was playing a Filipino character. And we had someone who was like, oh my God, I never see this. I wanted to draw a piece of fan art for you. Well, Tian Min, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. There's equivalents, yes.
Yeah. Fantasy Filipino is what we like to call them.
Yeah, I said the same thing. Minkai is Fantasy Japan. And yeah.
Exactly. It's not hard to look. When you look at Golarion, it's not hard to tell. I made that meme a while ago that's been reposted a lot, especially recently, of the map of the Inner Sea with like, what country are they actually? And like, you've got fancy Transylvania, you've got literally Egypt, you've got it's just Persia, America, all of that. But the point is, we made that and we decided what game should we play instead of Doomsday Dawn, because we want to give this a second chance, because we think we can do it, but our first attempt didn't go great. So a few months later, we tried again, and the Pathfinder Kingmaker video game had just released. And we were still in the playtest, and I was like, let's just do Kingmaker. And that, I don't know how, but I think we got 10,000 downloads in like the first month. And it only kept getting... Yeah, no, it was terrifying. we were like, what the hell is happening? People are listening. People are like joining our Discord and like talking to us. There's people like talking about us in places we're not. That's terrifying. And then obviously COVID happened, I think the year after, just as we were getting started into Extinction Curse. And I think that was where it went from good to great, because I think Extinction Curse, a lot of people like to, if you'll pardon the pun, clown on it, because as written, Extinction Curse doesn't really deal with circus teams after book 2, to which I say you've just got to try harder to cram it in there as much as possible.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I feel like the adventure paths don't necessarily connect from like the first adventure to subsequent ones, like as written, but yes, you can make it work as a DM to keep that stuff relevant.
My players were very into the circus stuff, like very into it. Like the moment we heard there was a circus adventure path, we were like, we're playing that one. So when it started showing up a little less in book 3, I was like, oh, they need to go travel through this area? That's fine. The circus is going on tour. And I had them do a circus performance in every town. And that book was not the travel from town to town and do these heroic quests. It was the circus is coming to town. The circus is doing a tour of the Swordlands. And you guys are all going to be like the headliners. And yes, you have to do this adventure, but you have to do advertising and marketing in each town. You have to convince the mayor to let you perform, And that really, really kicked stuff up. And I think we managed to avoid it ever not feeling circusy. I think to an extent the book does a decent job of giving you places you can have the circus. I think the only one that doesn't really have a huge link to the circus is the last book, because that one is very much so about like wrapping up the epic level stuff of your adventure. But we still started and ended that book with a circus performance. The finale, the final episode, spoilers for Dice to Roll Extinction Curse, is a circus performance where the characters are all introed in this amazing monologue that Dave did, where she like kind of acts like a ringmaster, Royari, the swashbuckler character, and she like very tearfully thanks everyone for coming to this huge performance. They're kind of the big one because there was like scouts for a huge festival that would basically make them rich were there, and it was great. It was I think one of the most heartwarming sessions I've ever done, and also coincidentally one where I had to say the word clown more time than I think makes sense in a TTRPG session normally.
Yes, yeah, I would think so. So with all your exposure to Pathfinder stuff, what do you feel about like the return of Mythic that's coming out soon?
I am very excited. I haven't had a chance to. Okay, this is really funny. I don't know when this is coming out, but again, I
probably
got
around
my
the same time that supplement is coming out for real, I think, for the episode.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, at the time of recording, it's the first day of September. I just got War of Immortals today, and I have not read through it yet just because everything's been so busy. But the fact that we are getting Mythic again, I'm really excited about it. I'm a little curious to see how it'll be implemented into adventure paths, because I don't think it feels like something you can just drop into an adventure. Not with the, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Again, I haven't looked at the rules, but I'm hoping to see at some point in the future some Mythic stuff popping up in adventure paths, because I think Mythic is great. I inserted Mythic into my 1E version of Hell's Rebels at the very end, and it was fantastic. It was a lot of fun. I understand that there were like flaws with the implementation, but the idea of being this like next level god hero, that is a very fun fantasy to play with. And the stuff that's been revealed publicly so far, I think like one of the ones was about being a foretold king or a prophesized king or something.
Yeah.
And I was looking at that being like, man, I wish that was out when we had been playing Kingmaker, because that is so much fun.
Yeah, I think it would also work well for balancing for your group, because then you can just sort of throw on a few Mythic levels to
True.
make you the right power level for whatever you're doing.
That is true. With the previous campaigns, I'd kind of just been shrugging and being like, it's fine, they can handle it without me rebalancing anything. And progressively, that became less and less feasible because the balance in the game started to get better and better. So when we were going into Abomination Vaults, which was quite a combat heavy adventure path, or at least it can be. I think people say Abomination Vaults is nothing but combat, but there is a lot of roleplay in it, and also combat is roleplay. But point is, there are fights. There are a lot of fights. Whether you avoid them or not is up to you. But when I was going into this and I was looking at them, I was faced with two options, and it was either rebalance everything properly for everyone, or just level them up a level higher. It's fine. And I went with the second option, and it's been working great.
All right. Yeah, I figured that might be the way. As long as you're not hitting up against 20th for the path, then you don't have any issues.
Even then, you just hit 20 level earlier, and it's fine. I'm not too worried about it, you know? And then, like, the last fight, by that point, if you're level 20, you have access to basically world-raising feats. You can turn into a kaiju. I think most of the time, even if it is a tough fight, you have the stuff to face off against 20 level stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, I agree.
Mm.
Well, yeah, I guess there's a couple different things I wanted to go over here.
Okay.
One of them, I guess, like Pathfinder 1E and 2E, what's your feeling between the two of them?
I am actually very able to answer this because our offline game, we had returned to Starfinder 1E, which it's not the exact same as Pathfinder 1E, but it was our first time returning to a system of that type, right? With like stuff like CMD and all the old skills and the way that feats works, and the multi-classing, yes. And I will say I am grateful for everything that Pathfinder First Edition did. But now that I've had Pathfinder Second Edition, it's there's some things I'm very happy to go back to, but there are other things where I'm like, no, I'm so glad we're gone. I don't like thinking about this stuff. It was too complex for me. And it's crazy because at the time when I played it when I was playing Pathfinder First Edition, when that was the only version, I definitely thought it was the best TTRPG system. And like versus D&D, versus Call of Cthulhu, it was the one I clicked with the most. And I was like, it does everything right. And now going back, I'm like, what is any of this? And that's not to yuck anyone's yums, obviously. There's still a very healthy community of people who play Pathfinder First Edition, and I'm very glad they're able to continue playing it. But for me, after kind of seeing how modulative Pathfinder Second Edition is, but at the same time, basically everything runs off the same set of rules, I am very grateful to be able to play it. If I were to go back to First Edition at any point, I don't think I would hate it, but I would probably use as many Unchained rules as I could to make it feel like 2E. Ironically, one of the first things that my players wanted back from into Starfinder, they asked for the 3-action economy, which thankfully there were some rules from Pathfinder Unchained, which is where that was first introduced. So we were kind of able to hack it in a little bit. But they wanted hero points back, which was something I was very surprised by, because I think a lot of tables are kind of lukewarm on the concept of hero points. But I think my tables just do not like rolling low ever. And if they have a hero point to burn, they will use it, even if it's a kind of inconsequential roll. Of course, this leads to them not having the hero points when they do need them, but
yeah,
that leads to storytelling in its own right, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean they're great to like maintain that like narrative cohesion. Like I'm supposed to cut off the villain's head here, and I get a 1, and we need at least a 13, so I'm going to roll again so I can do that.
Exactly. Like we were playing Starfinder yesterday. We were doing karaoke. And one of the characters had not yet been revealed to be this, but they are a former member of a band. So when they rolled to do karaoke and they rolled a 2, they were like, please let me use a hero point here. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. And he rolled a 19 and it was perfect. It was such a good story moment for him to just sing his heart out in that regard. And like I said, Pathfinder First Edition isn't Starfinder First Edition, and there are differences between them. But as far as like the core engine goes, in hindsight, Pathfinder First Edition it's trying to give you a lot of options, but those options are not modulative. They don't fit together, right? You can't take from column A and column B and column C. You will have stuff that you can't import from one game into another. And aside from that, there was a very real power creep as the game went on, because every time you introduced a new thing, a new class, you were making entirely new systems, right?
Yeah. I feel like one of the things I've heard about for second edition is that the designers are almost scared of doing that again.
Yes,
so a lot of the new options end up being like, nah, I don't want that.
I think what you'll get is you will have the design. There is a little bit of power creep in second edition. There's no denying it. When you look at stuff that came out in the remaster, for example, versus stuff that came out maybe in like Guns and Gears, newer stuff is quite strong. And I don't think it's a bad thing so long as everything's strong. It's kind of like the if everyone's special, no one is approach. And I think that's working out pretty well for them. But there was a period, I want to say maybe like 2022, where a lot of the books they released were kind of duds mechanically. I loved them because the narrative stuff in there, and that's always what I'm there for, is I'm there for the stories. I'm having fun. But like one spell was create trench, which creates a trench.
Right.
And I thought that was great. I'm like, yes, I can create a trench so I can hide in it. But a lot of people were like, but this doesn't really give you mechanical benefits when this other thing does this better and blah, 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 blah. And I get it. It's fine. But I think the great thing is, again, about second edition is much easier to ban a particular book's content, I feel. Like I would have an easier time being like, don't use any stuff from Guns and Gears in this campaign. It just won't work. Because the books are the mechanic books are all thematically focused. And you kind of had that sometimes in first edition, but other times you would have stuff that were like kind of just a book of, and just here's some more stuff, right? And that's fine, but sometimes that new stuff was not really on a fair playing field with other stuff. Like we saw with the Summoner class in first edition, it is the only class when Pathfinder Unchained came out that did not get buffs, because Unchained gave like a couple of classes like new toys to play with, like rogues, you know what, you get a little more HP, you get a little bit of a mini buff here and there. Monks, same for you. Summoners, we are taking your toys away. They're too good. A lot of jokes about Pathfinder Chained in that particular one.
Yeah.
But generally, I feel that the core chassis of the classes in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there is no class I would say is like better than any of the others, which is just factually not true in first edition. Mm-hmm. In first edition, you could easily make a tier list of every class, where they were, how they were doing. But with second edition, because of the way that everything is so modulative, you can swap stuff in, you can swap stuff out so easily.
Well, I think also the different feat structure, like forcing people to develop different areas of their character, ends up making them more balanced inherently.
Yes. And even then, let's say you make a class that isn't great, right? Like the Witch was not particularly good when it was first released. And the remaster did very much so fix that. But the Witch was not a particularly good class for a while. The designer who was working on it left Paizo to get a much better paying job in Wizards of the Coast. Good for them. Hats off. Chase that money. But what was left over was kind of half-baked. And, you can't see into another designer's mind. So when the other ones were trying to clean it up, it was a little lacking. And when the fact was that we came along and we're like, that's fine. Here's Witches Plus. This was our first like Team Plus book. Mm-hmm. We wrote a couple of new options. They weren't stronger than any of the ones. We made them to be balanced with them. But because there were just more options, so people had the ability to, like you said, diversify their classes, make them more complex, make them more simple if they so chose. People were able to make witches they wanted. And for a while, anytime there was a post on the Pathfinder subreddit about witches being like, I'm not having fun, you would have like 6 or 7 people coming in being like, you should get Witches Plus, go do that, it fixes a class. And that was never our intention. And I think we kind of tried to tell people we're not fixing these, guys. But the fact of the matter is, if a random book with like 20 pages, just adding more options can quote unquote fix a class, that wouldn't happen in first edition. You would just say this subclass is better than the old ones, or this one isn't as good as the new ones.
Or it'd be like a feat option that improves other classes that were already better as well.
Yes, very much. Or my favorite, a good level dip, right? Like we were playing Starfinder. One of the characters wanted a bike. They are an operative, and I was like, well, the best way to get an operative a bike is just to go into mechanic for one level, and it will make you a better bike rider than a mechanic ever will be, because you have the one thing you need, and then all your operative stuff, which works better with it, you know? And I miss the way that multiclassing works in 1E, but I also don't miss it, right? Because the way that 2E does it, like I said, everything's kind of like little Jenga blocks. You can pull them out, you can put them back in. So long as you don't touch the ones at the bottom, you're fine. And I think that is a design space I really, really am very pleased to have to work with.
Yeah, and I think it's cool because it still supports like prestige classes and having them sort of turn on even earlier because of the way it works.
Mm-hmm. It's great. I remember that being especially something when we were doing the playtest. They had a Grey Maiden archetype, and the Grey Maidens were a huge thing in the lore of Pathfinder, and they were a prestige class. But the way it was a class that you could only get at, like, I think level 8. So you would have to have done a few levels before you could get this. And I don't think they've done as many as I would nearly love of high level things. But I think the reason why that they haven't done as many high level archetypes is because they introduced a rule, the free archetype rule, which was like you get an archetype feat every time you get a class feat. And it feels like the entire Pathfinder community absolutely loves that feat and uses it everywhere as often as possible. So most archetypes benefit from having options that take you from level 1 to 20 or wherever you end up playing.
Right.
Because people will be taking that many feats from archetypes. And that's something I think is nice as well, you know? Jenga blocks.
Yeah, definitely. Well, before we get into like Abomination Vaults, I also wanted to talk about like Golarion as a whole. Like it's a sweet setting. So Abomination Vaults is focused on the Absalom area. So you want to, I guess, start there?
Yeah. The thing I like about Golarion is that every country feeds into each other. I think when people see it for the first time and they see, this is on topic, I promise, and they see why is there a nation full of undead right next to a nation full of space robots in the desert, Conan the Barbarian style. And I think, first off, that is a fair criticism. That is one I'm a little confused by sometimes as well.
Yeah.
Having been in Iron Gods and Carrying Crown, it is insane to me that those countries are next to each other. But what I love is, the world affects itself very much so. And I think the Isle of Kortos, Absalom, is a great example of that. Because it's like, once upon a time, there was this other country, and it did some smart stuff. It did some stupid stuff. It became Atlantis because they angered the gods a little bit too much, or other conspiracies about what actually happened. Right. The country's gone. One guy survived. He went around the world. He did this. He did that. He came back, and these are like the things he did, and this is how he founded this country, right? And Abomination Vaults and Extinction Curse both take place on the same island. So when we went into Abomination Vaults, we already were very familiar with this place because we'd seen stuff that happened with it in the past when we were playing Extinction Curse. But
they do that a lot with the adventure paths where they overlap with previous locations.
Very much. And I really appreciate it. Especially certain adventure paths will be set in the same place. Curtain Call, like I mentioned, is set in the city of Kintargo, which was the home of Hell's Rebels, which is one of my favorite adventure paths ever. It's so much fun. But you'll have stuff like, even on my shelf right now, Seven Dooms of Sandpoint, I think, is the I want to say the fourth adventure path that starts in Sandpoint in Varizia.
They got Rune Lords 2, Jade Regent, and yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay, I'm right. Not Shard Star. That's part of the Runelord's trilogy, but it does not start in Sandpoint. That much I know.
Well, still related.
So there's four of them in this one town in Sandpoint. And I like that. I like that the world feeds into itself. And you'll have NPCs from previous adventure paths show up, and you won't even realize it if you haven't played them before. And that's fine. But if you have played them before, you'll be like, oh my God, that's the guy. We were playing Tyrant's Grasp at one point, and we ended up not finishing it because it's an incredibly depressing adventure path. Props to the writers. That was what they set out to do, and they did it.
Yes.
But it was just a bit grim for us, and it was getting to, it's fine. They did a really good job, and we really had fun when we were playing. But when we were playing it, you're introduced to Watcher Lord Ulton II. And my players already knew about him because he had shown up by reputation in Carrion Crown. He was in Carrion Crown, the boy prince of Lastwall. I think he was like 21 years old. He was elected as the leader of this nation of Paladins when he was 19. And they were really excited to meet him. And it never occurred to them that time had passed in the setting between Carrion Crown and Tyrant's Grasp. So the boy prince was 31 years old. He had a full beard. He was he was different to what they remembered of him, because they were like, this is a kid who's running a country. Here they were seeing a man who was running a nation that had fallen to his worst enemy while he had his back turned. And that was such a fun thing. And you can't really get that kind of development unless you have a world that is kind of like as alive as Golarion. And that's something I really love.
Yeah, I think it is really cool that they're developing the world, and that the adventure paths actually have some weight to what's happening, and that you can sort of, if you're doing each of them, or at least ones that go to the same location, you do see that progression of characters and places.
Mm-hmm. It's just very nice. Like, even Age of Ashes, I think, visits Kintargo in one book. And it was so delightful to see NPCs we had met and see this is how they've been doing. This is how stuff has changed for them. Unfortunately, one of them was an NPC that had died in our campaign.
Yes, I do think there's some limits for
Yeah.
what you can adjust, because they have like the canon ending.
Yes,
like the Ruby Phoenix one has an assumption about the first Ruby Phoenix adventure for what the PCs pick for their prize. And
yeah,
if they didn't pick that, you've got
to come up with some other explanation. And that has happened for us in the past as well. Without spoiling too much of Hell's Rebels, because I think Find a Pat are playing it, and I'm sure there are people who are listening. The leader of Kintargo is at one point she's turned into a vampire, and she's locked away underground. But you are assumed to save her and heal her from being a vampire. And we didn't do this because in Carrion Crown, one of my characters' parents was a vampire, and they had not been saved. And there was a whole emotional arc about accepting that and letting it go. So coming in being like, la 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 la, she's back, it's okay, she's cured of her vampirism, felt a little cheap. So we let her stay a vampire and not be the new leader. We had an election for a new leader. Everything's great. But every time it talks about Kintargo, it's like, and Lord Mayor Gilia Baronellis, I'm like, fuck, so pardon me, rats, you know? She's supposed to be a vampire. But if you can kind of worm your way around, this character I killed is alive when they shouldn't be, or this thing that I assumed happened, you know. In fairness, I think a lot of the time they do a good job predicting player choices. And a lot of the time it's easy to assume that the players will be successful in beating the campaign. Like I found, I guess, again, spoilers for adventure paths, but I was reading a book I had received particularly early in advance, which told me that Tree Raiser was going to die in the War of Immortals. And I was like, oh my God, no, that's huge. That's a huge spoiler. Why would they tell us this? And then when they're advertising the next adventure patch, the headline is Kill Tree Raiser. And I'm like, oh, okay. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess they want you to do it.
It's the selling point, right? This is the adventure path where you kill Tree Raiser. And once you kill him, he'll be dead. And that's fine. And I assume most people who play this campaign, where kill Tree Raiser is the selling point, will probably kill Tree Raiser, you know? And you do get that sometimes. Other times you will get it where that is not as universal. I think the most notorious one was Iron Fang Invasion, which assumes that you make peace with the Hobgoblin army that had been raising your lands, and you make a peaceful end to the war, and they go and they set up their own nation in the mountains, and that's Oparak, and that's a canon power of Pathfinder now. But there are some people who played that and are really unhappy with that decision because they're like, those guys are evil. Like, they did a lot of bad stuff. We can't just let them go make their own nation. But in canon, and a lot of adventure paths now rely on there being a nation with a hobgoblin government.
Uh-huh.
And some people I feel are a little stressed about that decision. And I don't really see a way you can not do it in lore at that point. Like, you can't pretend there's no hobgoblin nation unless you change the origin, which in my case, I probably would have done something like that. I would have said, oh yeah, it's not run by that person. Don't worry, it's this other thing. It's the people who didn't want to join with the Iron Fang. I don't know, I think, yeah, there are sometimes when Golarion is pre-written in a way, and I think that might sometimes rub players the wrong way. But if you can get past that, if you can make your own answers to stuff that you don't love being canonized, which is, it's your world first off, the setting that Golarion provides to you is so interwoven and interconnected that it makes even your own home campaigns, it makes the world feel so interactive, and you can have characters from anywhere that makes sense, and it feels like a real world. And that's something I really like about Golarion.
Yeah, and even if you have a character that doesn't quite make sense, like just sort of Pathfinder society answers the question.
Exactly. Why is this person here? They're here.
Because they're part of the Pathfinder society. They got sent here, so they're here.
Yeah, they took a boat. It's fine. And I love that.
And I feel like there's some very strange adventures also. I was thinking of you're probably familiar with the one I'm thinking of right now.
Which one? I'm trying
the
to
one
think
where just the title of it spoils it.
Oh God. Is it first edition or second edition? There's two I'm boiling down to in my mind.
I don't remember. I mean, we can spoil it. The Rasputin one.
Oh, Rasputin Must Die. Yes. Another great one. Okay. No, you want to know one that's bad. Because Rasputin Must Die, at the very least, it's exciting, and that's fine. But it doesn't really ruin the story. Like, if you know, oh, Rasputin's in this adventure at some point. Cool, great. That's a really fun thing. It's a little sad you found out, but it's fine. You can go in knowing that. But in second edition, there is Agents of Edgewatch, which is you start as guards, you become detectives. It's a lot of people don't like it because the first book has some pretty violent depiction of policing, and I think that's very fair. It was also released just as the Black Lives Matter movement happened, so people were not feeling particularly charitable at the time, and I will admit I was among them. I ended up running it anyway, and it's been one of my favorite adventure paths. But I usually like to tell my players the name of the books they're going into. But I told them I cannot tell you the name of book one. Because as the adventure starts with you guys going into a tavern, you meet this loser elf guy who's being bullied by some drunk people who, like, he runs a hotel called the Dreaming Palace, and he's like, please help me. The people in this tavern are, being disorderly. Can you use your guard stuff on them? And you do, and the adventure continues, and blah, blah, blah. At the end, it turns out that actually that elf was a serial killer, kind of like H.H. Holmes style. His hotel, the Dreaming Palace, was a murder castle, basically. Like, he would lure people in and he would kill them in awful, evil ways. Like, he had traps everywhere. Great adventure path. The only time I've ever felt sickened by something while playing Pathfinder, it made me stop and go like, okay, we gotta skip this encounter. That's too nasty.
Wow.
But I could not tell them the name of the adventure path, because the name of the that first book is Devil at the Dreaming Palace, which it's supposed to be a reference to the H.H. Holmes novel, like the novel about him, Devil in the Silver City. But it tells you the devil is in the Dream Palace. The first guy you meet, hi, I'm the proprietor of the Dream Palace. Anyway, I'm not going to show up again. Bye. It's like, that's strange. Why did they call it that?
Yeah.
It was certainly the most questionable name for an adventure path I've ever seen. It's good, but it's far too on the nose, And I think that generally they avoid it. Sometimes they'll have something like Hand of the Devil in Abomination Vaults, where you don't know that there's going to be devils into it until it's, halfway through the book, and it turns out that those devils are actually quite important to the story. But overall, I think it's fine. Sometimes they'll put the big bad on the front of, like, the books as well. And I'm not going to spoil one of them that's coming out soon, but there is an adventure path where the first two books, the characters are on fine. And then the character on the third book is so recognizable to everyone in Pathfinder and should not be on the cover of a book because they should not physically be there. And it's like, wow, why are you here? To put it into context, imagine you were playing a random D&D campaign. Book 1, you've got an NPC from it. Book 2, you've got another NPC. And then there's Vecna. And you're like, okay, something bad's about to happen. And you've spoiled that's going to be about Vecna at some point, I guess. It happens. It's fine.
Is she not recognizable? I didn't.
Who?
This is the third one for Abomination Vaults?
No, Curtain Call.
Oh, sorry.
I'm not gonna. I won't spoil anything, but I would say if you're planning on playing in Curtain Call, do not look at the cover of book 3.
Well, maybe they'll change it.
I don't think so, and it's fine. It's just like, my warning to Pathfinder players out there: never look at the covers of the adventure paths. They will spoil major stuff for you.
Yeah, I guess if you're that clued into the genre.
Yeah. If you're at the point where you can start recognizing characters from Pathfinder, yeah, just stick away from the covers. Don't look. It's fine. And don't need to read the names. And you know what? Don't even think about the books. Just let the DM handle it. It's fine.
So I did want to ask you about, like, your adventure path focus for playing. It seems like, you're doing that for the podcast and for your home games, because the podcast adventures move really slowly compared to your home game pace, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So what's your draw to the adventure paths compared to, like, making your own stuff?
So I think, to me, it's a combination of stuff. First and foremost, it is definitely true that they're very well written. They have their hiccups, of course. Like I said, a lot of people are not pleased with how Extinction Curse played out. A lot of people don't love how Edgewatch played out. But at the same time, when you play something like Season of Ghosts or Fists of the Ruby Phoenix, or even Abomination Vaults, which has not really a ton of story, to be frank, it has a story that you give to these people, and how much you want to focus on stuff is, you and the players. But I remember picking up a D&D module for the first time and opening it and being flabbergasted because I'd been spoiled by Paizo. A D&D module is very much so a collection of set pieces that I feel are kind of strung together, and it's the GM's responsibility that you go wherever. In Pathfinder, though, it kind of feels like you're playing a video game. And the players obviously are the players. And you are I want to say you are the console. You are the narrator.
Uh-huh.
You know where the story is going. But seeing them hit the beats and like seeing their reactions to it is such a joy. On top of that, like we were saying, Golarion evolves depending on what players do. Being able to see, here's Hell's Rebels. It's a country that is, you're playing in a country where fascist, devil-worshipping theocrats are oppressing your people. You are going to join a rebellion, and you are going to save the city and make everything right again. It's very Hamilton. It's very high fantasy. It was so much fun to run. But then you come back to it. You've done the rebellion. Here's another adventure path. You happen to go into Kintargo. You see how the world has changed. And that's magic. I think that is one of the most magic things, is seeing the impact that your characters can have on the world. And Paizo does a really, really good job with that kind of thing, especially lately. I feel in 1E there are some times where an entire adventure path can kind of, they're not bad, but they're a little bit meandering. You'll have a really strong book 1, and then 4 books, that aren't great, and then a decent finale.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Jade Regent because I read through that one. And that's kind of the point of it, is that it's like this journey and that the middle ones aren't connected, but they're also not connected.
That's the problem, right?
Yeah, I feel like the third book in that one you can even just ignore as a player. Like, there's no incentive.
That's the thing. I just told you that I loved Hell's Rebels. I skipped most of book 5 because it just does not have much to with the campaign. Like, there's an adventure, like there's a part where you have received reports from the civilians that there have been hags in the woods and you have to go stop them. And I remember thinking to myself, why? Why is this? That's such a generic fantasy adventure, and it's fine, but we are playing as rebels stopping a fascist empire. Why are we randomly taking care of hags? Couldn't there be someone else doing it?
Yeah, that's not my problem.
Yeah, it's fine. Like, it's good, but someone else can deal with it. We're fighting a war here. I feel Pathfinder 2nd Edition, especially as of, I think Abomination Vaults is very much so where they realized how to hit their stride. They got some really, really strong writers in, and they've been going back to them, and they've been giving new people's chances as well. People who get what an adventure path should be. And I generally think there's maybe been one adventure path, and I'm not going to say it because I'm not going to say any adventure paths are bad, but there's one adventure path I think in the whole of Pathfinder since then that has been a miss. And I think that particular adventure path was just a victim of circumstances as well, with timing and pacing, and them making a decision I think was not right for that campaign. But everything else, every other adventure path, more or less has been like this phenomenal theme park, right? Like a video game that you are running through. It has characters you'll like, has set pieces you'll love, really cool fights, really cool story beats, and you come out and you feel, my character made a difference to this world. And you'll hear about the place that you were in a few campaigns later in another thing, right? Like, we're playing Abomination Vaults. 2 years ago, we were playing Extinction Curse in the same place. And we see people coming from these places that were saved by the heroes we played in Extinction Curse. We see people who were directly impacted, for better or for worse, by what happened in the circus, and that's really something. when we're playing Abomination Vaults, we had a Zulgat at one point. They're like the troglodytes. There was a Zulgat in like a very recent episode, who's great, and I love that character. But the Zulgat were the primary antagonists in Extinction Curse. And being able to see, here's what the people who survived the adventure path and kind of meandered off elsewhere, here's what they're up to. And I just love that. To me, if Golarion is interconnected, then the adventure paths are the nervous system. They are what's carrying the message of the evolution of the setting to its players. Yes, and it does it in such a fun way that I could run my own campaign. I would have to write it. I would have to get the maps and the monsters. It would be fun. I've done it in the past. I wrote a whole campaign myself, Safe Haven. It's a Weird West story with cowboys and wizards and stuff. And I love it. I'm very happy about it. And it's based on a campaign I wrote myself. I played myself. And my players to this day still talk about it incredibly fondly. But it's just one campaign in that world. And I could make another, and there would be 2 campaigns in that world. Pathfinder Adventure Paths, there is something like, I want to say 17 in maybe in 2nd edition so far. Certainly there's at least 30 between 1st and 2nd edition. 1 second. Let me fact check myself quickly.
40 combined, and that's not even including
40
like
combined.
The individual modules. Like the first Ruby Phoenix was just a standalone adventure.
Mm-hmm. I would guarantee there's double of 40 standalone modules. And each of these changes the setting in small ways. Like, you might meet, I think in Carrion Crown, you meet a character, and we didn't know this because we'd never played it, but we met a character that was from Legacy of Fire, which was a 3.5 adventure path. And these characters will show up again. People have an impact on the world. And yes, sometimes it might not be the impact that your particular campaign went through. Like we said, people not loving that a particular ending of Ironfang Invasion was canonized. Mm-hmm. And that's fair enough.
But at least gives you like a guide for what you could adapt it to.
Exactly.
To change it.
Like I said, there's stuff that I've changed in my Golarion, and that's fine too. But it's so nice to have this, I guess, timeline of what is happening in Golarion at any one time. And yes, your players might do it, but if they don't, then some other unnamed adventurers will. I'm never going to run Bloodlords, for example. Not because I don't want to, but because it's a campaign that Ritz is playing in a different offline game. And I just don't fancy running it for anyone else because Ritz is someone that I would want to be running that one with. I know all the spoilers of it. I know what happens in Bloodlords. And somewhere in my Golarion, there are adventurers who did that same adventure path. You know?
Yeah, just ask Ritz how it went.
Exactly. I'll ask, hey, Ritz, how'd it go with those zombies in your one? And honestly, I don't know. There's something about that. Again, it comes down to the interconnectiveness and modularity of Pathfinder as a system and of Golarion as a world. Everything fits together, and I really like when it does that.
Yeah, it is really cool. It's not quite the same thing as like the Adventure League stuff where everyone's like playing in the same campaign, but they're trying to get as close to that feeling as possible.
Yes. And I think that like the Adventure League has in itself incredible merits. And it is not the same thing, but I like that they're similar.
How do you go about picking the adventure paths that you're going to play for the podcast compared to for your home games?
That one is a very good question because the answer, I think, is maybe until recently. The answer is with great difficulty. Because we picked Kingmaker because, well, there's a video game of it coming out and I hear it's good, so let's do that. As soon as we heard about Circus, we were like, we're doing Extinction Curse. We found out about Extinction Curse on the day it was announced at PaizoCon in like 2020. No, 2019. My mistake.
All right.
But we started it a year later, and I'd been thinking about it until that point every day because I was so excited to play Circus. But then this is where it starts to get tricky, because at that point, a couple of other adventure paths had come out, and I had asked them, and we had kind of come to a consensus. We would do War for the Crown. We would convert that to 2nd edition. And then I got incredibly anxious because I read War for the Crown and it was very grim and it was reminding me of Tyrant's Grasp. And there are some choices by the writers that I'm quite critical of from a political view. Depictions of things that border on stereotype that I think were not intentional, but very misguided and very wrong to have. And unfortunately, they're like core parts of that campaign. So I had a little bit of a freak out and I panicked. And eventually I kind of came to the players and was like, guys, can we do something else? And, they were fine with it. We went and we did Ruby Phoenix. And at first I think they were a little hesitant because they were like, well, I really like the character I had planned for War for the Crown. And I was like, I'm sorry, I should probably have read the entire adventure path before I said, yeah, we'll definitely do that. But when we ended up doing Ruby Phoenix, it was great. And I specifically decided, okay, for the next adventure path, I don't want to choose until right before we play it. So I visited my friends, because I'm in Ireland and the others were all in America, in California specifically. So I visited them for the first time last year. And I was like, hi guys, we're just finished book 2. There's one book left in Ruby Phoenix, so we should choose the next one. And I pitched a couple of them, and one of them was Abomination Vaults. And I threw that in, kind of not really caring. I was like, it's an adventure path that's out. And the others were like, yeah, let's do a dungeon crawl. And in my head, I was like, oh, screw me. That is not what I wanted to do. Oh, no, that's a dungeon crawl. There's no role play in it. Oh, my God, what am I going to do? And then, more adventure paths were being announced. And it was like, wow, Stolen Fate, that looks really good. I wonder if Dice or Roll will play it. And it's really funny. If you look up messages from me from like this time period, anytime someone mentions the word adventure path, I'll swoop in and I'll be like, haha, maybe we'll do that one. Maybe we won't. Ha 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 ha. And I was like fully freaking out about Abomination Vaults for the longest time because I was like, oh God. And then Ruby Phoenix went on for way longer than we had expected. One of the players unfortunately had a death in the family, so they weren't, available to play for a while, which is totally fair. But it meant that my very slow panic attack about how Abomination Vaults is a bad campaign and it's not good, and I'm doing a terrible thing by GMing it, and the listeners are going to leave, and my house will burn down, and bats will swoop out of the sky and eat me alive. I was having a bit of a time. And then I played one session of Abomination Vaults and went, oh, wow, this is great.
Just one session?
One session in, I was like, wow, this is fun. I love dungeon crawling. So as far as picking goes, we're again going to wait until we finish book 2. And at this point, I'm just going to pitch them all the campaigns that I think I would like, no doubt. I'm not going to pitch all of them because that's what I did last time. I said, here's all the adventure paths we haven't played. And I was like, they're going to go Outlaws of Alkenstar. And I was like fully ready for a gunslinging adventure. And that's not how it turned out. And I was very nervous about it for a long time. I was, again, searching up on Reddit every other day, Abomination Vaults, roleplay, good? And people being like, I mean, the role play is what you make of it. And I was like, oh no, what if I don't make anything of it? But I'm not worried. I think that taught me a very important lesson. Even if we had run War for the Crown, I think it would have turned out fine. I think I would have been able to pivot it in a way that was fun for everyone without going into grimness, without going into stuff I, again, am quite critical of. But we, like, at this point, we're about halfway through book 2. We'll probably be finishing book 2 relatively soon. And I'm just going to come up to them with the adventure paths that I think I like and I think they will like as well. And say, hey, this is what we've got. What do you guys think?
Yeah, group decision. I think it sounds good.
I'm considering putting together a PowerPoint. I had considered it last time and I didn't. And I feel maybe I would have sold Outlaws of Alkenstar. I'm kidding. But I think being able to give them like a good look at what we're doing and then a group decision. We've tried to do like ranked choice voting before because they're like, that way everyone wins. But there's 4 of us and ranked choice voting doesn't really work.
Yeah, with 4 people, you could just do consensus. You don't need to do that.
So at that point, I think what we'll do when we discuss it is we'll just do consensus. And that's fine. And I'm excited for it. Oh, wow. Sorry. I looked at one of the adventure paths I was considering running and it has a product page now. I'm like, oh, that is gorgeous. Wow. Okay. Can't think about it too much. Otherwise, I'll start, Exactly. And that's something I want to avoid doing because then if it doesn't go that way, then I'll be freaked out later. It's silly. But it was definitely, when you asked that question, like, oh boy, that is a can of worms.
Well, I was thinking one cool one to do next, for my perspective, because of the video game, Wrath of the Righteous, now that the Mythic rules are coming out as a conversion.
That is definitely something we have considered, especially with the Mythic rules. The one thing is I am worried about putting players into grim campaigns because Wrath of the Righteous, it's not in a. I don't think it's as bad as Tyrant's Grasp. There's not going to be heads.
Realistic.
Yeah, it's demons. It's fine.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the energy I like to generally bring into Dice Will Roll is very bubbly with occasional streaks of absolute terrifying horror, right? Especially in Abomination Vaults, which I very much so did not let my players know it's kind of a horror campaign until they were all. I was like, just make classic D&D type characters, make dungeon delvers. Don't worry about the monsters. And we had in book 1 an arc about the. Again, very like an elven wizard who's very pretty, silk witch helm. He's lovely, he's polite, he's sweet. And he has an arc where he struggles with cannibalism after being affected by ghouls. And
yeah,
that is quite grim. But Wrath of the Righteous, the one thing I'd be concerned about is, it is a campaign about war, and it's a campaign about demons. And by extension, the horrors of sin and death, and what if the afterlife were really mean and full of monsters. I think we could do it, and it's something I would very much so consider. I know my players love playing champions and clerics, so they'd have a time.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it's very much so I have to try figure out how to keep it a bright part of people's days. Because I don't want it ever to become a slog to listen to Dice Roll. I don't want people to be like, these characters are suffering and there's no end to the misery in sight, Yeah,
I definitely see that for that adventure.
That is definitely like kind of an unwritten rule, I guess, in the adventure path selection is I always try to choose ones that at least feel like they might have an undertone of happiness. Like I think it's fine for me to say because we haven't picked yet, but of the adventure paths that are out, some of them we're probably not going to look at as much. One of the things we were looking at was even Starfinder adventure paths, because now I've played some Starfinder and obviously the playtest is out. But I was looking at some, and there are some very good Starfinder adventure paths, but like Attack of the Swarm, which is you guys are soldiers fighting off alien bugs. That one I read through, and I just felt, will people be excited? Like, they'll be excited to come in and listen to this every week, but also, will this, if even one listener is coming out being like, I feel worse than I was before, that's something I'm trying to avoid if I can. For home games, all bets are off. They can suffer as much as they want. I am putting needles into them. But with the record games, I feel, especially since so much of Dice Roll's audience is queer people who are quite depressed because, how can you not be with the life we're kind of, the society we're finding ourselves in.
Right.
But I try to be responsible in what we're portraying and how often we're portraying it, and always giving people like that silver lining, that glimmer of hope of, hey, yeah, okay, Fiore was basically like the victim of extreme prejudice in this episode. People were very cruel to him about being a Cambion. But we'll also do a scene later where Fiore gets to have a happy day out with his family who love him very much, and they'll protect him from the bad things that are happening. And even if there is bad things in the world, there is good stuff. And that is very much so, again, something when we're picking adventure paths, I always try to find ones where it's very easy to insert that hope into it.
Right. Yeah, that's a great social responsibility that you've taken on yourself. That's really cool. One of the things I was curious about for your group is that, like, you said you started in high school. So were you in California at that point?
No, I met them through Dave. I met Dave through that game of Iron Gods.
Okay.
I had known him, but I hadn't known him at that point. But Dave had just come out of high school. I think Luna was a year before him. She had graduated so the year before him, and Ritz was still in high school when I met him. So we would have been, I think I ran Carrying Crown for them in it was 2016. Oh God, that's weird. Oh, it's almost been 10 years. I don't know how to feel about that. Moving on. Point is, I had never been in California. My first time was literally last year when I came to visit them. And I'm actually going back in a month, or by the time this episode is out, a month ago. And to, just to see everyone again, say hi.
Right, yeah.
Dave is living with me now. That was a whole ordeal, figuring out visa stuff. But yeah, I never got to know them in high school, but at this point, I've known them longer than I've known basically any of my other friends. So I guess it's kind of evened out.
That's cool. Yeah, I feel like having a long-running group is a real blessing. Like my group I met in elementary school, so we've been together for more than 20 years now.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, one of the members is like a family friend. So it's this funny thing where we can claim that we're the longest friend we've both had of each other. So he's older than me, that. So we've been friends as long as I've been born. Yeah,
that's lovely.
So you met them through Dave through the internet initially, then okay?
That's right.
That when you said that earlier. Okay. Going back to Abomination Vaults, like it's on Absalom, and the island there, and Absalom, from my understanding, I haven't read through everything about Pathfinder, but is sort of the cosmopolitan, like, melting pot city of the Inner Sea region, where there's a bit of everything there. And it's on an island, and the Abomination Vaults takes place in Otari, or sort of really next to Otari, which is a little village on the same island.
That's right.
It's close to Absalom, but not quite there.
I think it's like a 2-day journey, if memory serves.
Right. So one of my thoughts about it was, when the players first investigate, what's their reason for not like going and getting the Pathfinder police from Absalom to come investigate and help them out and sort of hand off the problem to someone else?
That is a very good question, and it is one that is like a lot of people who haven't played the Adventure Path often also worry about, and even people who have, like I've seen people be like they try to go to Absalom to go get other people to fix it, and technically you probably could, but I feel the reason that my particular party did not is they're called to adventure. There's a little job board, and each of them takes it for their own reason. And they meet with Rin, who is this fortune-telling woman who's very, very eccentric, and tells them, hey, look, there's a light out there in the swamp, and I don't know what it is. Could you guys go check it out? Because if it's this bright that I can see it from here, then it's really bright. They go and they investigate, and it's a lighthouse in the middle of a swamp. And it has never been doing this before, but its light is on now. They do some investigating. They find out that this lighthouse is probably where the founders of the town, the adventuring party who made the town 500 years ago, had their final battle before they retired from adventuring to found that town against an evil sorceress. And they're like, wow, that's pretty cool. Anyway, we figured out. Job done. Adventure Path's over. We're going home. They go home. They chill out for a while. They're like, yeah, I mean, it was weird. It was a dungeon, but it's not really our problem. So long as nothing weird happens.
Uh-oh.
And then literally that night, because a certain amount of time had passed, the lighthouse's light suddenly got so bright that it shone onto the graveyard, and it raised the dead, and it teleported an awful monster into the town. And they had to fight it, they had to kill it, and it was like, okay, that place is dangerous. And on top of that, we could go to Absalom, but we don't know when it's going to do that again. So we need to stay close enough to help, because no one else in this town has the ability to fight like we do. This is a town of people who have never really had a call to an adventure. Literally,
yeah, it's like 300 people, right?
Yeah, it's very small, and these people, mostly they're fishermen. There's a lumber company, and some of them are lumberjacks. The town guard, when the monsters arrive, it is written into the text that they are cowering. They don't know what to do because they've never faced undead before, because it's such a quiet place. So they felt they had to take it upon themselves to continue into the dungeon themselves. And yes, someone else could have gone and got the guards, but at that point, these guys were doing such a cracker job at it. They were like, wow, the Fogfen Few, that was the name that they ended up receiving, are doing such an amazing job. They've cleared out the floors. By the time they've been able to deactivate the lighthouse and find out, hey, don't worry, they're not going to teleport more monsters in, we found another pressing issue that's happening. I'm not going to spoil anything of that. I think, listen to the show if you're interested.
Right.
But there's always this time pressure that's kind of hanging over the players of, you can't really just sit back and let someone else do it. This town can't protect itself. You don't know if other people are going to be able to do it well. You could call in adventurers from Absalom, sure, but they might ask for more gold than you have. They might not do it well. They might die in the process. The only people can do it are yourselves. And for better or for worse, the characters are slowly kind of entranced in their own reasons of continuing to go into the vaults. Some of them find stuff that they really want to do down there and really want to learn more about. Some of them also find stuff that they want to learn more about in a less ideal way. And I think it kind of weaves itself into this pounding urgency of, yeah, someone else could do it. but would they do it right? And even if they did, like, yeah, the guards, we could call the guards. There's like 50 of them. But we saw how they were when the zombies came around. They went to Absalom at one point, and Absalom, a lot of the people there are very, they're quite, I don't want to say elite, but they've got grander things on their mind than a muddy little town in the sticks,
Yeah.
So it kind of comes out to only we can do the thing that needs to be done. And I think that's a really good call to adventure and a call to action for heroes, is only we can do it. And I love when a story does that.
Yeah. You mentioned like the connection to the town's founders, and like there's 4 founders to try and like have parallel connections to the party. So I'm assuming that's part of what draws the players to like, this is our responsibility because
exactly
this
each
is
of
our
them
town's problem.
Like one of them is like, wow, because he's a Fiore. I mentioned him before. He's a Cambion. He is a paladin of Sarenrae, who you may know from Critical Role as the Dawnflower.
Yep.
Or the Dawnflower, whatever it was. The sun goddess. And one of the members of the Rose Guard was herself in my version at least, a member, like the founding member of the local church of Sarenrae. So being able to be like, wow, this is what the person who made my church went through. Then we've got Silk, he's the wizard. There's Zarmavdian, who was a wizard in this original party, who started writing dire messages into his spell book that something much more sinister than what was appearing to go on was happening beneath the town. And Silk has gotten very, very, very invested into reading books he maybe should not have, Necronomicon style. And that's, like I said, you've got the good reasons to keep coming back, and you've got the very bad reasons for it.
One of the things I was curious about was how relevant Sarenrae was to the adventure. You know, light goddess, and there's a lighthouse that's just the focus, and you're sort of going underground away from the sun, and like you said, the founding of the temple in the first place. Does that feature strongly as you go further on?
So the answer is kind of like in our one, yes. In our version of it, Sarenrae is a huge part of it. Not that she herself has her works here, but Sarenrae has informed a lot of the party's decisions, because the champion of Sarenrae is bound by particular agreements and a code of honor to do as Sarenrae would do. And Sarenrae, among other things, is a god of mercy and of redemption. So a lot of the party, when they meet a monster, their first reaction is only to pull swords if the monster is clearly just attacking them without thinking. But if the monster starts talking to them, they immediately listen and they immediately will talk. But there is something thematic specifically about bringing the torchlight down into the depths, being the sole things that rely on light so deep below the ground. There are I like to keep it kind of poetic. It's not like, and then Sarenrae herself was here and she left this miraculous. It's more like, in my game, she is quite important because I feel it makes poetic sense for her to be important. But in someone else's game where they don't have a champion of Sarenrae, you could very much so just leave her alone. I made one of the Rose Guard a member of that church, but you don't need to. You could do it your own way, and I think that's fine too. Another person might instead take more from stuff that we haven't done, like the fact that there is a Thieves Guild in the town, and that Thieves Guild is still important, and we still do stuff with it. But we haven't focused on it as much because none of our characters are thieves, you know?
Right.
And I think that's kind of like how it, specifically in Abomination Vaults, you choose the roleplay aspects that you emphasize or don't emphasize. In a campaign like Ruby Phoenix, if a god's important, the answer is, yeah, the god's important, because it is written into the plot. But Abomination Vaults, I feel a lot of it is I think something like 80% of the word count is dedicated to being in the dungeon. And yet we spend, I would say, maybe 1 in 3 sessions back in town talking to the townsfolk.
Yes, that's where I thought a lot of the role-playing focus must come from, is that
Yes.
instead of having sort of a progression of characters, it's the same characters for each of the adventures. It's you have the 300 people in town, so you have to get to know them, and like you said, there's all these like 50 militia members. You could probably give each of them a name, and the characters could establish their relationships with each of them.
Yeah, we did do stuff like that. We had a random militia member who the party was like, oh, hey, this guy's cool. What's his name? I was like, his name is Budrick. And Budrick became an important character who had an impact on the story. When Ritz was like, I want to have a character that is related to mine in the campaign, sure, I put it in. Dave wanted his character to have a family. Those are characters we come back to quite a lot. In Ruby Phoenix, you would, for example, or especially in a Extinction Curse, I think, because Extinction Curse is the one that does the most traveling, I think. You would more so be, here's a new town, here's the people in this town, what do you make of that? How do you interact with these people? Some of them will come with you, some of them say their goodbyes, and that's fine. But in Abomination Vaults, like you said, a lot of the roleplay comes from expanding your relationship with the town of Otari and giving yourself a real reason to save them. But also with the monsters in the dungeon itself. I think the first 2 bosses of the campaign of each floor, my party actually made peace with very quickly, because they were like, okay, hold on, this monster is trying to talk to us. And yeah, we could have a fight. It has the stat blocks for a fight. The book says if the party says the wrong thing, he attacks and fights you, right? But they have gone out of their way to make friends with a good portion of the creatures in the dungeon. And that's a really unique role-playing challenge, is playing things that would normally want to kill you, being like, yeah, actually, well, this is what it's like to live down here. I guess you could have some moss if you're hungry, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also like this purification aspect to Abomination Vaults in some way, where, purify by fire is one way to take it. But,
I mean, I do think in a way you are making the vaults a better place to live in as well. There are people in the vaults who are making the other people in the vault's life worse, right? Without going into too much detail, one of the first missions that they are given is they go into the first floor and it's full of gremlins, and these gremlins are here and they're like nefariously planning to attack Otari, the town, and they're rude and crude and really nasty, and the players do fight some of them. But when they meet the boss, they ask, why are you here? And the boss is like, oh, well, we actually came from the floor below. We used to live there, but we got pushed out because these other guys came up from a lower floor and they claimed our home. And, if you were to get rid of him, we'd be out of your hair. And that's the kind of thing that happens quite a lot in Abomination Vaults. These people, a lot of them just want to live in peace. It's just that their home happens to be in a grody old dungeon. But then you have the more nefarious bad guys who are linked to the main plot. Like the bad guys, why is this lighthouse glowing? What is the plan of the people who are like working beneath it? Who is this evil god that we're hearing warnings about? There are followers of that plan who are terrible and nasty, and get rid of them.
Yeah, I don't really know what reasoning with those people would even be like.
It probably wouldn't turn out nice, considering their motivations are probably a little omnicidal, right?
Yeah.
But then you've got, hi, I am a monster, and I can speak, and I live here because it is nice, and I'm kind of just chilling. If you fight me, I'll kill you. But if you're just passing through, I'm happy to give you some directions, you know? And that happens a lot more than you would give credit for. There was a devil who was like, yeah, man, listen, the wizard who like ran this place 500 years ago, he summoned me, and then he died, and my contract is still technically being enforced. If you find my contract, could you go like rip it up? I won't hurt you if you do that. And that's a really fun role-playing opportunity that you would not really get in a lot of other campaigns. And it's something I've really enjoyed about Abomination Vaults specifically.
Yeah, it does seem like even compared to Ruby Phoenix, where you're having the same interactions a lot of the time, but those are like explicitly adversarial with the other teams. Compared to this, where you have, like you said, the demon guy is not just...
He's just a guy.
Yeah.
Sure, he might love to stick a trident into you, but he's able to recognize that's not really as beneficial as you making a deal with him. You know?
I mean, there's other things to be said. Like, is killing a devil like an explicitly good act? You could argue about that.
Yeah, I guess there is a lot, but like he's going back to hell, and he's not going to bother any mortals for a while. He said specifically, "Look, I just want to go home and sleep for a while."
Yeah,
and I think there's interesting aspects to it like that, and I've really enjoyed being able to like afford that kind of thing. You know. Having roleplay with things that are not traditionally considered people, right? I had a roleplay with a mimic the other day. Like that doesn't happen in most campaigns, because in most campaigns, a mimic is there to bite your face and kill you, and that's kind of the end of it. And it's great.
Yeah, I don't even usually play my mimics as smarter than animal intelligence.
Apparently in Pathfinder they can be. Well, they were before the remaster. The remaster maybe doesn't have mimics anymore, but I like them, so they're staying.
Yeah, I feel like there's and you could make them intelligent whenever you want, or animals like dragons in a lot of like original literature are animals, but then
yes.
Because Tolkien made them smart. We got to make them smart in all of our Tolkien-inspired fantasy
If
RPGs.
Smaug can talk, all of them can talk.
Right. Well, I had another question about Abomination Vaults with like the mega dungeon focus and Otari being such a small town. Like as the players level up, get stronger, get all these like cool magic items, how do they sort of trade in their dungeon loot for the stuff they actually want? Like usually there's a magic shop or something like that they can.
So I've actually been a little realistic about this, in that at the very start the shops were not particularly wealthy, and they could sell stuff, but they didn't really do too much of it, because we want the treasure we have, and it's a little scant. We haven't found too much of it yet. But by the time that they've got more and more treasure, and they've got more and more stuff that they want to sell, they've also been buying more and more. So the local economies have kind of been really stimulated by the amount of loot being put in and out of their stores. So slowly they're being able to afford greater items from outside of town. So like, for example, the local charm shop, which is run by Rin, the eccentric fortune teller I was talking about before.
Right, yep.
She started with like a couple of talismans because that's just what she had. By the time that the players have sold her a good few things, she now has discretionary spending and profit to buy more expensive stuff, and she has done so, and now that's in her shop. And it's been really interesting to see, because I've also like started dropping hints that there's more out of towners starting to appear in town, because there's rumors of this dungeon full of treasure, and slowly but surely that's kind of stabilizing and boosting the economy. But also some of these people might be here under the impression that they will get rich quick by visiting, when that is still a very dangerous dungeon full of very dangerous denizens if you're not careful.
Is that written into the adventure path? The other people showing up?
No, not really. It is implied that you can, but where I got a few of those ideas of like having more people show up was a third-party supplement, which was Abomination Vaults Expanded, I believe.
Oh, okay.
By Taylor Hodkiss. And this book is fantastic. It's something like, let me check. Yeah, it's like 100 pages long. And it's just notes of changes this person made to Abomination Vaults and ideas they had to make it more engaging and to cover up some weaker plot points. And I've really appreciated parts of it. Other parts I've been like, I don't know, I don't like this part, I'm not going to include that. And that's great. You know, like the fact that you can kind of pick and choose what you would like to include. But they were like suggesting you might have bounty hunters starting to show up looking for particular criminals who were... There is a criminal who is like mentioned to be hiding around in the first book. And they're saying, why don't you have bounty hunters show up and start foreshadowing them? And then maybe you might have cultists show up and start like becoming a threat on floors you've already discovered. Those two I don't think I'm going to do, but it did get me the idea of, what about getting more people in? What about having people come to Otari to see what's happening here, as rumor of like, hey, did you hear that small town by the bay has suddenly started having more and more treasure coming out of it? I hear there's a dungeon that's been uncovered and it's absolutely massive and they haven't even explored it fully yet. You know, it's kind of given a dungeon meshy style economy boost to the setting, and I've really, really liked that.
Yeah, that's cool. I guess my curiosity there is like that sort of progression of the economy is something that might take like months or years to evolve in a rational, like,
of course,
realistic way, and sometimes we have to accelerate that kind of stuff for the game. Is this something that you feel like would be natural, or you're just sort of like, let's have the progression happen in 2 days instead of 2 months?
I think it has been so far quite natural. If memory serves, it's been about in character 2 months since the vault started kind of like being a problem. So by now, and because like you will often have the players be like, hey, I want to take a week in character where I just retrain and study and get stuff here that is not related to the vaults. Because I think my character will have a nervous breakdown if they're going into this thing every day. And this is a campaign. You don't often have a campaign where downtime is quite so easy to do. I think notoriously Gatewalkers is a campaign where everything happens extremely quick and you have no time, because there is that time pressure. And like I mentioned in Abomination Vaults, there is a time pressure as well. But so long as you are in the town and keeping a very close eye on it, it never feels impossible to do. So I guess to answer the question is, the change in my Otari has so far been pretty small. I haven't like suddenly you can buy 10th level items, because like level items are rare, man. These guys are
right. Yeah,
they're not really at that level by any means. But the good news is, of course, as well, if you wanted to have a particular magic item and the town could not feasibly have it, it is a 2-day ride away from the biggest market in the continent as well.
Right.
Like you can literally see when you are looking at Absalom from the sky, you can see the market. It is massive, the Grand Bazaar. So you kind of have an easy hand wave for any item you might want, which is something that came up. My party needed Wolfsbane. That is a 10th level item. It is very rare and very expensive. So they had a quest to find it, and they weren't able to get in town. They weren't able to ask anyone, hey, can we buy Wolfsbane from you? Because we're like, no. Why would
It's
we
fun-
have that?
That's funny because, like, I feel like in a fantasy world, like, that would be a very common, like, apothecary thing. Like,
You
because
would
it's
think
so
so. You would think so.
critical.
The answer, I think, the lore reason is it's not like you don't have the plant wolfsbane. I think that the process to create wolfsbane into the distilled poison that you would usually use for like treating lycanthropy is very dangerous and expensive to do.
Yeah, I think
And
one
I
of
think,
the myths for it is you need to like harvest it under the full moon or something like that.
Mm-hmm. From what I understand, in Golarion, it's kind of like, yeah, the plant you can get wherever, that's fine. But we're looking for like the distilled poison. I remember like my player asking me, can't I go into the swamp and look for wolfsbane? And I was like, you can certainly do that, but once you have it, you would need to make me a crafting or nature check to make it. And because this is such a high level and dangerous item, that is not a low DC, and you might waste a lot of time and money doing so. So ultimately, it became this quest to find someone who could make wolfsbane or someone who already had made wolfsbane. And ultimately, that quest led them to the Grand Bazaar, and they were in Absalom for a while, and that's where they were able to kind of like make their opinions of the people in Absalom.
Okay, that's cool. Well, one of the things that I noted about your DMing style was that you seem to kind of narrate for the players more than I think a lot of other DMs do.
Yeah, I try not to too much. I'm not sure if you noticed, but I talk a lot. I think with I will usually try to prompt them a little bit. But sometimes I think when it comes to thinking of flashy effects on the spot, my players, where they shine is interperson roleplay.
Mm-hmm.
They will sometimes genuinely make me, they will leave me stunned with how good they are at it. They will go on for like a 40-minute roleplay between themselves and an NPC, and it'll be extremely emotional and extremely well crafted. But then sometimes if I'm like, how does this fireball look? They'll be like, oh God, I don't know. And normally I would give them you give them time to like figure it out exactly, but our episodes are already quite long, so we try to like speed up the process a little bit.
Uh-huh.
So long as they're having fun, that's kind of like the way we do it. The other factor is I feel I've kind of a big in for GMing to me was the Adventure Zone. And that is also very much so a Griffin McElroyism, is narrating everything all the time. And I think I picked up a lot of that when I started first GMing, and my players seemed pretty pleased about it, so I just kept going.
Oh, that's cool. Imitating your heroes.
Yeah, very much so. I had people say they've done the same to me. I'm like, no, you're not doing that to me. You're doing that to Griffin. You are getting Griffin. You're playing telephone game with Griffin McElroy. You're fine.
Well, and how do you feel like the campaign is going? I guess you said you've quit other ones in the past, so I'm assuming that this one is going well.
Usually when I've quit another campaign in the past, it's for one of two reasons. And it's either because of a falling out with the people on board, which, it happens and it's never pleasant, but it does happen.
Yeah.
Or if the campaign is taking too long. We didn't quit Strength of Thousands, but we are playing Strength of Thousands as a home game. And we actually had to take a break because we were 2 years into the campaign and we're 3 books out of 6. And it was getting quite draining playing with these characters, and I could tell that my players were also starting to get a little tired.
Mm-hmm.
I usually try to make sure that a campaign doesn't take too long. I like a year and a half at the most, which I know a lot of people apparently are quite surprised by. But I like to offer new stuff to my players very often, like a new character, a new backstory, a new archetype of person that you can play and stories you can tell from it. And generally, I think that if I can keep a good pace of the plot progressing, but also having as many roleplay moments as possible, then I'll be satisfied. And Abomination Vaults, I am more than satisfied. It's actually probably, I don't want to say it's the most fun I've had in years with a campaign, but it is definitely up there. I don't think I've ever had, I think there's maybe one episode I came out of being like, I didn't do great there. I didn't have a great time. I think, and that's crazy because we're like on 35 episodes by now. To have 1 in 35 be a dud, you know? In other campaigns in the past, I've definitely come out several episodes in a row being like, ugh, we just have to get through this one arc. I don't like it, but once it's done, we'll move on to something else, right?
Right.
There was like, you know, a section of a chapter in Kingmaker that I was like, oh God, this sucks and I don't want to be doing this anymore. But we got through it. It was fine. That has never happened with Abomination Vaults. I genuinely think, I don't know how, because it is mostly combat. I think because so much of it is letting the players decide where they're going and what they're doing.
I think part of it compared to the old adventures is that the newer ones introduced a lot more story XP to keep like the fighting from getting like this grueling experience where you just have to keep doing like certain sections because you need to get your experience for the next adventure or for the final boss of this one or whatever. And by having that experience be loaded into story experience, it becomes like we'll skip the drudgery.
Yeah, I think so. A problem with, especially in first edition, is you'll have encounters that are there for experience points. And I think that was maybe just a expectation of 3.5's era of adventure making. Was sometimes there'll be a combat that's just there to get you some EXP, but we don't run with EXP. So sometimes you'll have adventures that are bogged down by, and then a random owl bear runs out of the woods and bites you, and you're like, cool to see an owl bear, but once I've seen one, I've seen all of them, you know?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, in Abomination Vaults, and with a lot of the newer ones in general, it feels like every time you have an encounter, it is there for a story reason. And that does make, like I said it earlier, but every fight is a role play in itself. And I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's something that I try to bring in with my own adventure design to try and have the combat shouldn't just be like a featureless area. You should have something else there. Like if they don't know the characters they're fighting, then the arena needs to be sort of its own character that the players can sort of understand
exactly
exploring it in a combat.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can have an interesting foe that's like interesting on its own. There's plenty of stuff like that. But
mm-hmm.
And yeah, Pathfinder has definitely embraced that a lot. Even in like the old first edition ones, I don't think they had like sort of bland combats. It just might get to be you need to alternate what you're doing, right?
Yes. You can sometimes get a little bit grindy, especially like I said, right? And I think it comes down to experience points very much so in first edition, like I mentioned. The hag adventure in the middle of Hell's Rebels, where it's like, why? What are we doing this for? You know? And it's because, well, we want to have experience points to get you to the next part of the adventure. And we don't really have anything, so here's a bit of filler. I think they've gotten much better at it. And especially, I think, like I said, I think Abomination Vaults is where they realized people like it when an encounter is there for a reason. Because even in Extinction Curse, there would be like, there's a weird monster that's near your camp. And it's like, what if it wasn't there? Would that change the story? No? Then there's no weird monster. Great.
Yeah. And I feel like this is something that video games do sometimes as well, to like not have the gameplay start to feel repetitive, is to break it up with like mini games or like, ooh, a crafting table, I can upgrade my stuff. And really what that's doing is like the upgrades are almost meaningless. It's you take a 5-minute break from killing zombies or whatever, and now your brain is more primed to keep killing zombies because you took a 5-minute break that the game forced you to take instead of you standing up and walking around. But,
exactly.
So like I think Paizo has been introducing those kind of breaks to the adventure paths as well. Well, Derry, we hit all of the talking points I wanted to get to. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring in? Gosh,
I think a lot of the stuff I had wanted to talk about was also kind of brought up naturally in conversation.
Yeah, cool.
I was able to talk about the stuff I do. I was able to talk about how the adventure is going. I suppose the one thing I want to say is if you are listening and you are looking to improve your world and your homebrew stuff, I wouldn't turn away lore books from other settings, right? For example, with the pre-written stuff in Golarion, you don't ever have to run a game in Golarion. You don't ever you don't need a reason to put a game in Golarion. It's fine. I think the majority of players for Pathfinder 2nd Edition play homebrew adventures in Golarion, but there is still a pretty sizable amount who play homebrew adventures in homebrew worlds. At the same time, I think the one thing I would like to talk about is like being able to pick up the lore books, the Lost Omens line from Paizo that talks about specific places in Golarion. The reason being is because these books give brand new insight into fantasy that you would not necessarily have yourself. The Mwangi Expanse book that came out, I think, 2 years ago now, is a big example of this. But even more recently, the Tiansha World Guide is all about Asian fantasy. And you don't really get Asian fantasy quite as much in Western TTRPGs. And if you do, they're not great. And it's just a matter of like people not writing things they're familiar with. It kind of sometimes leads to fetishization of cultures, which can kind of just boil them down into stereotypes, even if they're well-meaning stereotypes.
Looking at Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, exactly, right? The Tiansha World Guide was written exclusively by Asian people with a few helping hands of people who just knew the Pathfinder lore really well. Same for the Mwangi book. And this isn't just for Pathfinder stuff. I'm not just shilling for Paizo. The Ravenloft Guide, it's one of the only 5e books I have, but the stuff in there for horror stuff is fantastic. So I guess what I'm trying to say is lore books, I feel, are sometimes an undervalued commodity in TTRPG if you're not playing that game. Because like you might pick up the core rulebook of an adventure of a system you're not going to play. But I would generally suggest picking up these lore books, whether it's D&D, whether it's Pathfinder. I don't know any other systems off the top of my head that do lore-specific books for their systems.
Vampire the Masquerade.
Of course. Jesus. Yeah, Vampire the Masquerade. And read stuff about lore that isn't from your own home games, because it will give you ideas. It will expand on what you can do. It's technically a lore book, but it's also the core rule book. Pit Crawler, which is an indie game by Jonathan Sims, who you might know from like the Magnus Archives, or also his band, which I forget off the top of my head. Pit Crawler is a dungeon crawling book about a world where there's, I think, wizards are like the equivalent of billionaires. The rest of the world have basically nothing, but because a wizard can alter reality to be of their choosing, they're treated as these huge celebrities who are vastly rich and also a little petulant and not really knowing anything that they're doing. And it's a fantastic book. the mechanics in it are great, but what I loved in it was being able to read about the ideas and stories presented within. And if all this blabber we've had about Golarion has sounded at all interesting to you, and you've never played Pathfinder, and you never intend on playing Pathfinder because it's not what you're looking for in a game, that's fine. But I really do suggest for any system, if they have lore books, consider checking them out. That's me getting up my soapbox and being like, go support these things because they will make you better storytellers. I've adopted stuff from the Ravenloft Guide into Golarion. I've taken stuff from Pitcrawler and put it into Golarion. And I know people who've taken stuff like the Lost Omens line and put it into their homebrew worlds to great effect. So that's my little rant out of the way. That was the one thing I wanted to bring up at some point.
I definitely agree. I feel like there's this idea that when you're creating something, you also kind of want to be consuming that same kind of content so you understand what it is and what's good and what's bad from your own taste. And there's different ways to consume that content. Like, hey, here's a podcast episode that you're listening to right now about Golarion.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you can go read an adventure path, like what I've been doing lately to explore the system. You could play the 2 video games that are set in Golarion. Or you can go listen to Derry's podcast, Dice Will Roll. There's other ways to explore it besides just reading. But yeah, reading's also like, the number one way of transmitting information outside of conversation for millennia. So that's a great way to do it as well.
Yeah, 100%.
And yeah, you can do it with adventure paths. Like each of the adventure paths is like, 60 pages of adventure and 10 pages of monsters and, maybe 15 pages of monsters, and then another 15 pages of, like, lore about Golarion. Usually trying to be specific to the adventure that the lore is placed in, but not always. So you can read the adventure for ideas, and you can also read, like, the ending lore section for like lore ideas for other stuff.
Exactly.
And that makes you more educated and able to come up with cool stuff that your players will like. And that hopefully you like also.
Yeah, that's the main part as well. You as a GM are a player, so you have to have fun, You
must have fun.
You must. It's obligatory. It's the one Weird Al album, A Mandatory Fun.
Right. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Derry. This was really cool.
Thank you so much for having me, Isaac. It was a great time. I was kind of coming in with the mindset of like, okay, I've done interviews before. I'll just regurgitate the same stuff. No, that was just a conversation. It was great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it went really well. Take care, Derry, and yeah, I'll hope to listen to more episodes.
Grant, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. I've seen a lot of growth in the show over the last few months, and I'd like to keep it going. You can help by rating and reviewing the show on your favorite podcast app, telling a friend, or by telling any game masters you know to send in a survey to be on the show. You can find that survey at gocorral.com/STS. That's GOCORRAL.com/STS.